we're going to move on to alterations of consciousness. So we just finished talking about sleep, and now we're going to talk about other weird and unique situations of consciousness. So the first of these are hallucinations. And hallucinations are realistic perceptual experiences in the absence of external stimuli. So this is where you think that you're seeing something, or you think that you're hearing something, but there are no stimuli, there's no light reaching your eyes to signal your brain that you're seeing something, and there's no sound waves reaching your ears to tell your brain that you're hearing anything. So there's no external stimuli, but you still feel like you're perceiving them. Now, most people think of hallucinations as very rare events, things that only happen in very extreme cases, but they're actually a lot more common than you would expect. So people can have hallucinations if they are sleep deprived, if you've pulled an all-nighter to get a test or to get an exam written or something. Then maybe out of the corner of your eye, you're seeing something, or maybe something that you thought was a thing until you looked at it, because you're very, very tired. Those could be counted as hallucinations. People can also have hallucinations when they have migraines. Certain types of migraines come with weird, colorful auras, and that doesn't mean that things actually have those auras. It just means that migraine sufferers perceive them. When people are experiencing sensory deprivation, if you've ever heard of those newfangled float tanks where you float in sort of body temperature salt water in the dark, when you have no other stimuli to pay attention to, your mind can kind of invent some to fill in those gaps. And we can also experience hallucinations when we're having very intense emotions. So if you're overly scared or overly upset, anything like that can trigger hallucinations. So they're not as rare as people think, and they're not necessarily a bad thing. Some people even say that hallucinations are the sign of a healthy brain, but I don't know of any proof or any evidence to back that. So our next little case of weird experiences gets us into out-of-body experiences. And this is when you have a sensation of your consciousness leaving your body. So maybe experiencing yourself from outside of your body. Maybe you're floating away from yourself. And as odd as this sounds, there's about 1 in 4 college students, or about 10% of the general population, that say they've had this kind of experience. Now, for this type and a couple of other types of experiences that we're going to talk about, we run into this issue where there really isn't any physical evidence of anyone having gone through this experience. So people can have an out-of-body experience, but if we don't have them hooked up to an EEG, or if they're not in an MRI machine, then we don't have any way of recording or documenting the process. And because these experiences are fairly rare and difficult to pin down to a particular time or place, it's very difficult to study them, which is why, at this point, we don't have any evidence for it. But so many people have these experiences that it's really hard to think that there isn't something else going on. So, as of right now, we just don't know what is driving these experiences, and maybe that evidence will come in the future. On that same kind of note, we can talk about near-death experiences, which are a type of out-of-body experience, but that are specifically reported when people who have nearly died or thought they were going to die. So this is when people are in a severe accident, or maybe they temporarily died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. People who have these very close to death experiences, when they come back, might report having passed through a dark tunnel. Maybe they saw a light at the end of the tunnel. Or maybe they saw their lives pass before their eyes. All of these things are part of near-death experiences. And again, a lot of people who have nearly died report some weird perceptual experiences, but we don't really have any evidence of what's going on. So we don't know what could be causing these experiences, or even if they are really happening. For our last quick fire exposure to odd scenarios, we can talk very briefly about deja vu. And deja vu is a feeling of reliving a novel experience. So when something feels familiar, but it's completely new. And interestingly, with deja vu, you tend to experience it more when you're younger. And as you get older, you experience it less, which seems kind of weird because in my mind, I would think that as you get older, you've seen more things. So the feeling of, I've seen this before, should become more familiar, not less. But maybe it has something to do with younger brains forming. The proposed ideas are it might be excess dopamine involved in your temporal lobe, or abnormal electrical activity in the right temporal lobe. But you're kind of getting the idea that they're fairly certain it has something to do with the temporal lobe. Maybe. So, yeah, this chapter has a lot of, we're not quite sure what's going on, but this experience is so widespread that there must be something going on, which is why we mention each of these. Though if you're looking for concrete answers, this is most definitely not the chapter for you. So our next section is going to go a little bit more in depth into a specific, unique, and unusual experience. And this is hypnosis. And hypnosis has a really strange reputation. Reputation is the word I'm trying to think of. So hypnosis has a lot of weird connotations. So the official ruling on what we're going to talk about for hypnosis is that it is a set of techniques that allow people to have sort of suggestibilities to alter their thoughts, perceptions, feelings, and behavior. So specifically, we're trying to adjust their consciousness. Now, we've probably all been exposed to hypnosis. Either, you've gone to a stage show and there's a stage magician who wants to hypnotize a member of the audience. Or you have watched a TV show or a movie where some plot point anchors around a hypnotist. There are entire shows based around people who hypnotize people. But not all of what we are exposed to in popular media is accurate of what hypnosis really does. So, what hypnosis started as was something called mesmerism. And it was originally actually described as a state of nervous sleep that's produced by concentrated attention. So, because of this definition, they've named it hypnosis after the Greek god of sleep, Hypnos. In fact, hypnosis isn't a stage of sleep, and it actually has nothing to do with sleep, so it's kind of a misnomer. But by the time the scientists realized that, it was too late to change the name. So what really happens is you use what's called hypnotic induction to try and relax people and increase their concentration. You get them to focus on something to start suggesting ways that they alter their consciousness. And we have a wide range of clinical applications for people who are at least a little bit suggestible under hypnosis. So for clinical applications, you can imagine if you could convince someone who's in chronic pain that they're no longer in pain, that would be a fantastic use of a strange alteration of consciousness. Now, when I'm talking about suggestibilities, I'm talking about the fact that not everyone is equally open to this hypnotic suggestion. So a small portion of the population are highly suggestible, which means that they are easy to hypnotize and they tend to be completely willing to follow suggestions. Most of the population fit in this medium suggestibility range, where you could hypnotize them. It's going to take a little bit of work, and they might not do everything that you suggest for them, but they're going to do some of it. And then the last small portion of the population are very low suggestibility. It's very difficult to hypnotize them, and most of the time it's not going to work out. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all for hypnosis. It's going to depend on each individual and how their mind responds to that relaxed state. Now, to get into some of the oddities of hypnosis, when someone has been hypnotized, they subjectively experience their actions to be involuntary. They feel like they have no control over what they're doing. But we have this idea that people who are hypnotized, they can't do something that's against their nature. So if you were hypnotized and somebody tells you to do something bad that you would never do when you're not hypnotized, then you should snap out of it and know not to do that action. But this might actually be something that's coming from media. This might not be a true thing. As far back as 1965, they had an experiment with hypnotized people, and they got people to touch acid. Well, what they thought was acid. It was really just a bowl full of sort of a gross, frothy liquid that they were told was an acid. And so people were hypnotized and told to stick their hand into this vat of acid. Or they were told to throw that acid on another participant. And most of our hypnotized subjects followed the orders. They did exactly as they were told. And if this really was acid, they would have burned themselves or someone else. So this tells us, well, maybe that wasn't, maybe this idea that people can't behave against their will doesn't really apply. And that raised some concerns. Oh my goodness, what if hypnosis is controlling our minds and making us do awful things? But before we jump to those conclusions, what about the other part of the experiment? Our controls were told, pretend that you're hypnotized. So they went through the exact same setup, but were told, we're not going to hypnotize you, just pretend that you're hypnotized. And these people who pretended to be hypnotized would also put their hands in the vat of acid and throw acid on someone else. So maybe this experiment wasn't showing us that hypnosis makes people mindlessly obey authority. Maybe it just tells us that humans tend to obey authority, hypnotized or no. So we don't really know the extent to which it's responsible, or the extent to which hypnosis is responsible for that particular behavior, or if it's just human nature. So another kind of, misidea of hypnosis is that hypnosis produces a trance-like state in which amazing and miraculous things can happen. So if you've ever seen a stage performer who hypnotizes people, maybe you've seen a crazy feat of strength like the human plank, which is where you have a participant come up onto the stage, they get hypnotized, and then they're told to lay across two chairs. So a chair under their shoulders and a chair under their feet with the rest of their body out in the open and exposed, and they get these people to hold up the weight of other audience members. And it's a remarkable feat because someone who was conscious and not hypnotized wouldn't have the strength to hold that position with that much weight. There's also some crazy cases where people have been hypnotized to prevent an allergic reaction to a leaf that should provoke an actual allergic reaction. So they can stop an allergic reaction from happening. They also got the opposite to happen, where they had people develop an allergic reaction to a leaf that should have been completely harmless. And you'll notice that there's no explanations here on the slide. A little bit of the feats of strength might go to the idea that hypnosis can help change how we respond to pain, allowing us to do things that seem inhuman, but we really don't have an explanation for the allergic reactions. So this is one of those where you kind of have to look at these critically and evaluate what you think is going on, because there isn't really a good consensus in the field, which again is interesting, but a little bit disappointing if you're looking for abstract or concrete solutions. But on that note of pain tolerance maybe allowing us to have those feats of strength, we can talk about the fact that hypnosis actually causes changes in our pain tolerance. So there are lots of reports of reduced pain. So people who are hypnotized to not feel pain can have pain relief, even if they're chronic pain sufferers, like someone with really bad arthritis who's constantly in pain in their joints. They might be hypnotized to no longer feel that pain. And that pain relief can last for months at a time. It can be a very long-term solution. And, you might be thinking, oh, it's just a placebo effect. They think it works, so it kind of works. But brain imaging studies have actually shown that after hypnosis, these people's brain patterns change, specifically in the areas involved in processing pain. Though the interesting part is that these kinds of effects aren't exclusive to hypnosis. So this isn't something that we only see under hypnosis. You can also have people who meditate deeply, and they can also have brain imaging studies done to show that they have different ways of processing pain while meditating. So yes, hypnosis seems to interfere with or adjust how we process pain, but it isn't the only way to do that. So this brings us to our sort of grouping of myths of hypnosis, and we should have dismissed quite a few of these already. So the idea that these hypnotic phenomena are unique, not the case. So we just talked about pain tolerance increasing, and that's something that you can see with meditation or deep relaxing exercises. The idea of hypnosis as a sleep-like state was a misnomer from the very beginning and definitely doesn't apply now. So hypnosis is more of a relaxed and focused state of mind as opposed to the equivalent of sleeping. People think that hypnotized people are unaware of their surroundings, but we seem to have a pretty decent awareness. Our focus or our attention is just directed elsewhere, but we're not completely unaware. There is a little bit of some misconceptions around memory and hypnosis. So the basic assumption is that hypnotized people immediately forget what happens during hypnosis. And that is not the case, at least not always. Sometimes, in some situations, they've been able to hypnotize people specifically to forget things because of the hypnosis, but it doesn't always happen. And then the kind of opposite of that is the idea of hypnosis enhancing memory. And people see, especially on TV shows, where a cop will bring in a hypnosis expert to hypnotize a witness who then magically remembers all of the details of the person they saw committing a crime. And unfortunately, that is entirely fiction. People who are hypnotized and asked to remember something do end up reporting more details. and they end up more confident in their report of those details. But most of the time, what they report ends up being fabricated. So they make up details to fill in the gaps. So hypnosis actually leads to artificial memories or pseudo memories. And that is made worse by the fact that the people who remember, quote unquote, these things while hypnotized feel very confident that what they remembered was real, which of course can cause lots of problems if you had actually hypnotized a witness, because now their memory is inaccurate. So, if these are our myths of hypnosis, what do we actually think is going on? And of course, our answer is we're not quite sure, but there are a couple of theories of what's happening within the brain while people are hypnotized. So the first theory that deals with hypnosis is the dissociation theory of hypnosis. And this is an approach to explaining hypnosis based on a separation between different personality functions that are normally integrated. So this basically says that when we're conscious and awake and aware of things, our mind functions as a unified whole. But when we're hypnotized, our mind sort of splits off into two unique parts. So one part of the mind stays active but hidden. So this is our hidden observer. And it's going to be awake and aware. That's the part of us that still knows what's going on. But that's separate from the other part of our mind that mostly takes control while we're hypnotized, that is subject to suggestion. So the part of our mind that just goes along with things and sort of focuses on what we're being asked to do. So this theory says that our mind is going to separate and form these two unique functions, but it isn't doing anything beyond that. Now you'll notice we don't go into the specifics of how they split or why, and again, that's because we're not quite sure why, and people tend not to agree on why. But that's the basis of what they think might be going on. Another theory of hypnosis isn't so much what is happening to our mind when it's going on, but why we act the way we do. And this is the socio-cognitive theory of hypnosis. And this is the idea that our attitudes, beliefs, and expectations all shape what hypnosis means to us. So this is the idea that because we've seen hypnosis on TV and we are told that that's how you're supposed to act when you're hypnotized, if we ourselves are then hypnotized, we fulfill those expectations. And they've actually done research to test if this is the case, where they had a group of participants come in, they did a little bit of acting and said that there are two groups of participants. There are the ones up on the stage right now who have been hypnotized, and then you guys will be hypnotized next. And the group on stage, they're pointed out to have tremors in their left hand. And the new participants are told, oh, that's just part of being hypnotized. And then when the real participants are hypnotized, a lot of them spontaneously developed a tremor in their left hand simply because they were told to expect it. And there's lots of cool studies that have looked at stuff like this. So the idea is that if we expect something to happen, our minds kind of just make it. And that's what's going on with hypnosis. So very, very different theories, neither of which really explains what's going on.